Have you ever noticed that some of the oldest wisdom traditions on earth seem to disagree about almost everything? And yet they keep warning us about the same thing. Different cultures, different languages, different beliefs about God, the universe, and what happens after death. Yet Christianity, Buddhism, Stoicism, and Taoism all return to a remarkably similar warning. Be careful of the ego. Most people hear that and assume the lesson is simple. Don't be arrogant. Don't be prideful. Don't think you're better than everyone else. But what if that's not actually what these traditions were trying to teach? What if the ego is much bigger than arrogance? And what if the thing they've been warning us about is quietly shaping our lives every day? Because when you look closely, these traditions weren't simply warning against thinking too highly of yourself. They were warning against becoming trapped by yourself. And that distinction changes everything. Most people think ego looks like confidence, the loud person in the room, the narcissist who craves attention, the person who believes they are superior to everyone around them. Those are certainly expressions of ego, but ancient wisdom points towards something deeper. Ego is what happens when our identity becomes more important than reality, when being right becomes more important than learning, when protecting our image becomes more important than telling the truth, when defending who we think we are becomes more important than seeing clearly. And once you start looking for it, you begin to see why so many traditions arrived at the same conclusion. Take Christianity. The common interpretation is that pride is dangerous because it is morally wrong. But underneath that teaching is a practical observation about human behavior. The person who must always be right cannot grow. The person who cannot admit weakness cannot heal. The person who cannot accept correction becomes imprisoned by their own self-image. The warning wasn't simply about pride. It was about the danger of placing identity over truth. And this is where the story gets interesting, because Christianity wasn't the only tradition that noticed this pattern. Thousands of miles away, Buddhist philosophy went even further. This wasn't a side lesson or a moral guideline tucked into the teachings. It was architectural. Buddhism introduced a concept called anatta, or no self. The idea that the fixed, permanent self we spend so much energy protecting may not be as solid as we assume. What we call the self is constantly changing, shaped by memories, habits, experiences, and perceptions. Not a permanent identity to cling to, but a process to be observed. And from that insight came the teaching on attachment. Attachment to status, attachment to reputation, attachment to the story we tell ourselves about who we are. The tighter we cling to that story, the more we suffer when life inevitably changes it. Different language, the same pattern. The Stoics saw it too. They noticed how much human suffering comes from demanding that reality validate our sense of self. We become angry when people don't respect us, offended when they disagree with us, upset when we don't receive the recognition we think we deserve. The Stoics asked a simple question: why should your peace depend on another person's opinion? Again, the warning points to the same place. A self that constantly needs protection. A self that constantly needs validation. A self that can never rest. Even Taoism, which often approaches life from a completely different angle, repeatedly cautions against self-importance. Not because humility is a virtue to display, but because self-importance creates friction. The more energy we spend proving ourselves, the less energy remains for living. The more attention we spend managing our image, the less attention we give to reality itself. Four traditions separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. All of them seem to be pointing toward a remarkably similar pattern. Not arrogance, but attachment to identity. Because ego may be more visible now than at any other point in history. Not because people have become more arrogant, but because we have built systems that constantly encourage self-focus. Think about what social media actually asks of you every single day. It asks you to curate an identity, to post a version of your life that earns the most approval, and then it measures you with followers, likes, and views. Numbers that tempt us to measure our worth through other people's reactions. The algorithms add another layer. Their job isn't to reward truth, nuance, or wisdom. Their job is to keep our attention. And content that triggers strong emotional reaction often does that very well. Outrage, certainty, tribal loyalty, the feeling that our side is right and their side is wrong. Over time, that can create a subtle pressure, not just to hold opinions, but to build an identity around them. And once an idea becomes part of your identity, changing your mind can feel like losing a piece of yourself. Suddenly, you're not defending an argument, you're defending who you believe yourself to be. And entire industries have grown up around this, with personal branding, reputation management, the science of making sure the image you project to the world is always ahead of the reality of who you actually are. And maybe the clearest sign of ego isn't arrogance at all, it's defensiveness, that instant urge to explain, justify, protect, or prove ourselves whenever our identity feels threatened. The moment criticism feels less like information and more like an attack. The moment disagreement feels personal. The moment being right becomes more important than understanding. Today, ego often disguises itself as things we rarely question. The constant comparison to other people's lives, the need to be seen, the need to be validated, the need to control how others perceive us, the tendency to make everything about us. And perhaps that is why these ancient warnings feel surprisingly modern, because the problem was never pride alone. The problem was identification with self. Mistaking the image for the person, mistaking the story for reality, mistaking the self for the center of everything. Maybe that is one reason so many wisdom traditions return to this idea. Not to think less of ourselves, but to spend less time thinking about ourselves. Because the moment identity becomes more important than reality, growth stops, learning stops, and peace disappears. And without realizing it, we become trapped inside a version of ourselves that we're constantly trying to defend. The question isn't whether you have an ego. Every human being does. The real question is this: how much of your life is being spent defending an identity instead of discovering who you could become? If you enjoyed this exploration, I'd love to have you join me. Each week, we look at timeless wisdom through the lens of modern psychology and human behavior. If that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.